Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be the review for Smoke and Shadow Part 1. Specifically, this is going to be the kind of spoiler review. About a month ago, I put out an early kind of preview review of the book, non-spoilers, because I got a review copy from Dark Horse. But now, today is the official release date for the book in comic book stores, so it's out. I got mine at my local store, and it should be available if you have if you have a comic book store nearby. Today is obviously Wednesday, September 23rd, which is the comic store release. If you've ordered from Amazon or are looking to find this in a regular bookstore, you'll probably be waiting until October 6th for it to come out there. So yeah, in terms of brief non-spoiler stuff, all I'll say that basically all that's changed from a month ago is that I made a mistake in the previous review when I said that there was a little bit of Zuki is probably going to be controversial, everyone will be talking about it. Turns out, completely misread the page by way of reading the art rather than the speech bubbles. So there's one page in this book where if you just look at the art, it seems like they're going Zuki. If you read the text, it's not actually going that way. So my fault for that. Sorry for letting anyone astray on that. There are still like subtle hints at Zuki, but I really don't think they're going anywhere with it. So crisis averted there for anyone who I may be scared with my previous review. Apologies about that. But yeah, let's get into this book spoiler style. Now, before I get started, I will just say that I can't cover everything about the book in this one video because there's so much to talk about. So I'll refer you straight away right now. In the description, there's a link to Avatar Online Podcast Special Smoke and Shadow Part 1 review. It's a like nearly 3-hour podcast where we just spend the whole podcast talking about this book. It's four fans. Myself, Kelly, Greg, Troy. The three of us basically just spend about 10 minutes giving some non-spoiler thoughts just for anyone who wants to tune into the podcast but not get spoiled. And after that, we basically go through the book page by page, kind of analysing it and stuff like that. So if you have the book and want to do a kind of read-along type thing, getting analysis, that podcast is going to be perfect. Because basically I get to say everything I wanted to say about the book, and you get other opinions as we go along. We discover things. It's a really fun podcast. Definitely check it out in the description. But I'll try and sum up to the best of my ability my thoughts on the book right now. And I'll basically do that by just covering like a couple of the key points in terms of positives and a couple of the negatives. I'd say my main negative about the book is just the cover. Aang doesn't deserve to be on the cover because he's only in the book for about the first 10-12 pages. He basically is there at the start because this book pretty much continues on immediately after the end of the search. I'll get into the whole continuity thing in a minute where the rift takes place. But he's basically there to start. Aang, Sokka, and Katara then leaving basically Zuko and his family to be the rest of the story for the second half of the book, along with May kind of being the B plot. So, you know, in that sense, Aang by no means should be on the cover of the book. It should be May or someone like that, or just Zuko and Ursa or something like that. Aang is just not really in the book, and I think it's a little bit kind of leading you astray to think otherwise. It makes sense that Aang is on the cover for like some of the other parts, because he does come back. At the very end of the book, they just mentioned that, okay, the Kemurikage are spirits. We're going to need the help of the Avatar, so let's call out Aang back in. Now, the reason Aang and co leave in this book is basically just before they arrive back at the Fire Nation. They're still on the ship there. They basically agree that Katara, Sokka, and Aang basically agree that Zuko and Ursa and the new family, basically, they need time alone to kind of get to know each other again, for this new family dynamic to form. We're not going to intrude, so we're going to leave. We're going to go prepare for the Yu Dao inauguration ceremony coming up in a week. Now, this is where the continuity comes in. I'll refer you back to the Rift Part 1. First page of the Rift Part 1 is Aang and co at the Yu Dao inauguration ceremony. So, about 10 pages into this book, Aang and co leave. A couple of days pass, the Rift Part 1 happens. And the Rift Part 1, the Rift takes place over the course of just a couple of days. It's not really that long. Now, in the few days before the Rift happens, you get the first half of this book, effectively. The best way to explain it is that there's a scene in here with Zuko and Iroh where we get the full kind of details on kind of how everything kind of ends up kind of being run down. Where is it? It's... Here you go. Zuko basically, pretty soon after arriving back in the capital, they've just dealt with the threat of the new Oza Society. He just says, "Would you be willing to attend the Yudao inauguration ceremony in my stead? There's so much going on, I need to stay." Iroh agrees. That's why you see Iroh in the first page of the Rift Part 1. So you can sort of see that the first half of this book is set before the Rift, kind of setting the Rift up. And then very soon after that, there is a 1 month time skip in this book because of plot reasons I'll get into in a moment. And that's where the Rift takes place. And then the last few pages of this book take place a month later. The Rift, the main story of the Rift is over, and Zuko is now just about to call Aang back into play. And that's where other characters are going to come back from. So, a little bit more confusing than the other books, which were basically set immediately right after each other. But it makes sense. There's enough scenes connecting everything together in this book to fit it all together. So I like that. Another big positive I'd have about this book is Ursa's involvement and what they're setting up with her. There's a couple of really interesting things. The first is Ki, her daughter with Norin. Obviously, her face has changed back from the face that Ki would know, back to being Ursa's face as we know it. And Ki is kind of afraid of her mother now because of this kind of crazy thing happening. And it links into the other thing with Ursa, in that Ki is afraid of Ursa, yes, because of the new face, but also because Ki can sense that Ursa is very afraid. They constantly refer to the fact that Ursa's hands are freezing cold, because that's the way she gets when she's afraid. And she's afraid because she's returning to the Fire Nation, the place she had to leave, was exiled from, that has so many bad memories from her so long ago, and she's going to return there. And you can see that Zuko is aware that his mother is kind of like upset about something. He primarily thinks it's about Ki and the whole issue going on there. But he can't quite see that it's going to be tough for Ursa to return to the Fire Nation. And then the other side of things is like when they do get back, there's some really nice stuff with Ursa, just how afraid she is to even take that first step into the palace. Her reaction when she's walking through the palace and just happens to come across a giant portrait of Ozai on the wall. It sends her into a near panic attack. And that's kind of where we leave Ursa with this book. We get a lot of her kind of towards the start, like, okay, her relationship with Zuko seems pretty good. The family's kind of beginning to come together, though Ki is kind of like still a bit kind of concerned about what's up with Ursa, but Ki is very close with Zuko. The only other thing with Ursa I'll mention is just that she mentions Azula specifically. There's a moment on the ship just before they arrive where Ursa's looking a bit kind of sad about things, and Zuko comes over to her basically saying, Ki will come around, but she says, actually I was thinking about my other daughter. Do you think she's, warm, safe, happy? And then a really strong line, one of the best in the entire book, Zuko just says, I'm sure she's safe. If there's one thing Azula can do, it's survive. Happy though? I don't know what that would mean for her. That's really strong for Azula's character. That shows a key understanding of Azula as a character as she is right now. What makes Azula happy? We don't even know. We've rarely seen her happy. We've seen her content with the way some of her plans have come off, but it's been from more of a success kind of cruelty kind of perspective rather than personal happiness and stuff like that. I think the closest we've seen to a happy Azula is probably when she got the flirting advice from Ty Lee during the beach episode, and it was going pretty okay with that guy, and then she went a bit overboard and it went wrong. That's about the closest we've got, because that's probably the most real we've seen Azula. And I think they're going to do some really interesting stuff when she comes into play in probably the end of part 2. Azula does get mentioned by other characters. May and Ty Lee mention her in this book. And it's really interesting because Ty Lee talks about how like she's constantly afraid that Azula will pop out of nowhere, and you can see that Ty Lee is afraid. May isn't really afraid, but is thinking of Azula as like a lunatic right now. And I think they're very much setting up that at some point the three girls will be in the same scene together, and there's going to have to be some sort of a like follow up scene to the betrayal scene where I think May and Ty Lee need to explain why they did what they did to her so Azula can like understand why that would happen, and that it's not that they betrayed her, it's that they needed to do this for their own safety, and that Azula's the one who needs to change. They could do some cool stuff there. Of course, Azula still needs to sort things out with her mother, and that's obviously going to be the key thing. But I like to set up for the kind of Ozai's Angels kind of reunion as well. The other thing would be the Kemurikage, our kind of villain of the story. The mystery, we don't get too many scenes with them. Basically, the start and end of the book is the Kemurikage. And they just establish that they're a Fire Nation legend, primarily told by children, but by parents to their kids to make them behave. That if you're naughty, the Kemurikage will come down from the mountains and they will take you away for being naughty. And they're established as a legend, an old wives' tale. But as far as we're aware, they are real. There's 3 of them. They are manipulating Ukano to attack Zuko, and at the end of the book, they kidnap Tom Tom. That's their kind of key involvement here. The big mystery with them. Are they spirits, or are they people dressed up as spirits using this legend to their advantage? I don't really know right now. There's no like evidence to suggest either way. I think the fact that there are spirits involved in political affairs, to me, is the kind of main point that would make me lean more towards these are people in disguise using the legend rather than being actual spirits. But there's definitely arguments to make for them being actual spirits, in that there's a lot of kind of mystical kind of smoke stuff whenever they're around, and unless they're carrying like smoke machines around with them, it seems very like mystical spirit powersy. So I don't know where they're going with this. If they do that they're spirits, they're going to have to do some sort of an explanation behind why the spirits are involved in political affairs, and why they want Zuko off the throne, and why they're manipulating Ukano and stuff like that. Why they kidnapped Tom Tom. There's an explanation to come, but I'm eager to see it. It wasn't that I was frustrated with their involvement in the book. I'm not going to go too heavily into some of the other stuff, just that the romance side of things, Mei Zuko, which I think is a big thing people are going to be looking for in this book, Mei and Zuko do interact in this book. But I think what they're going for is that the second we have Mei and Zuko in a scene together where they're just one-on-one, able to just talk about things, they will get back together. I'm convinced that's going to happen. What they do with this book is that they have something happen every time just before that's about to happen. The main thing that gets in the way of this is Kalo, who's the character who's introduced in Rebound, which is the book setting up this one, who used May going out on a date to basically get her in contact with her father again. May punched him, and we thought that relationship was over. It is now established that she is now dating him, but not really. She's using him now to get information from him about the new Ozai society. But the interesting thing is, she's doing all of this for Zuko. They don't say as much, but there's a really wonderful panel, let me get to it. Page 19 at the very end there, where you can see that face that she's making there, and she says, "Hey, just doing my duty as a loyal citizen of the Fire Nation." That is not a sarcastic face, that is like, I'm doing this because I really care about him, I want to protect him. And that's a really big scene, I think. And you basically get that throughout this book, that's what she's doing this for. She's using this guy, helping with all this stuff to protect Zuko. And there's a hint that will happen. And Zuko is definitely, there's a scene towards the end of the book where he seems very happy to kind of be around May again, and potentially open up that relationship again. And I'm eager to see where they go with it. But the thing is, because of the events of this book, they actually have May's father kind of get in the way of that, because he starts to manipulate May into believing that Zuko is doing the wrong thing, and she's beginning to kind of lose faith in him, thinking that he's becoming more like Ozai, and she begins to actually care for Kalo. While the whole time throughout the book, we are not sure if we're meant to really like Kalo, or if we're meant to be kind of suspicious of him for being kind of almost like too perfect or too kind of nice of a character. That maybe he's like triple crossing her somehow or something like that. The people's reaction to Kalo is going to be very interesting. I think it was kind of mixed on the podcast, and that I think myself and Troy kind of were like, okay, I'm willing to give this guy a chance. I kind of like the setup for him. I'm interested to see what they do with him in part 2 and 3. Greg was fairly neutral, and then Kelly wasn't the biggest fan of Kalo as a character, so he could be a pretty divisive character. Definitely, for me, the role he's playing is kind of the wedge in between Mei and Zuko. He's the reason why they haven't just got back together straight away. But I don't think that will be a permanent thing. If anything, I think they're probably maybe going to get Kalo and Ty Lee together, because they set up a few little things with that. But that's most of the main plot. You know, the main plot of this book is the Kemurikage manipulated Ukano into striking earlier than the New Oyster Society had planned, against Zuko. The attack fails, and Ukano is then manipulated again, basically that if you can't do this within a month, there's going to be consequences. And the consequences, as far as we're aware, are that Tom Tom is going to be the first of his family to be kidnapped. And that's the big cliffhanger ending. Zuko knows about the kidnapping. They're all going to try and help Mei get Tom Tom back. And Aang is being brought in as well. And that's basically it right now. It's not the most plot-focused book. I don't think it's going to blow anyone's mind. But the character stuff in here is really good. I think the plot setup is good. The concepts are really good. There's some nice mysteries. I think people are really going to like this book. So yeah, there's a lot more I could talk about. I may do another video during the week about the book, but for now, like, I don't want this video to go on massively long. As I said, podcast link in the description if you want the full, super in-depth analysis on the podcast. It's there for you available. But for now, that's been the review. Thanks for watching this video, and bye.